I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We have a really fantastic panel here to talk about their Fulbright grants, doing research abroad, study research abroad. Very wonderful to have Chayla, Sherrod, Adriana Nelson, and Alexandra Alvara share their experiences with us. And we have some limited time, but if you guys, if participants want to send through questions in the chat box, just let us know and we'll try to get to them if we have a chance. So I just want to start out, I want everybody, it's really fantastic to everyone here. And I want this to just be a comfortable conversation because that's part of it, making sure that everybody realizes we're just people and we all are very capable of applying to these scholarships and opportunities and Fulbright awards. So I want each of the panelists to be able to talk a bit more about their own experiences. And we'll start with Chayla. If Chayla can tell me when you first decided to apply for the Fulbright program and why Fulbright?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So my name's Chayla. I was a 2018 Fulbright researcher to Namibia, which is a country in Southern Africa. And so I applied for the Fulbright because I have more of an unconventional kind of background. I was an environmental studies major and I wasn't really sure of how to connect my interest with like the policies and the law with my environmental background. And I feel like research is a way to uncover and unravel kind of how these different fields connect and intersect. And for me, I think the opportunity to do that abroad just had incredible and immense appeal. And so I think research in general requires a lot of autonomy. It requires a lot of planning, but also I think the product of it goes far beyond just having actual, data and information. You learn so much about how you interact. You learn so much about how a different country interacts. And for me, I really crave that. Coming from an inner city like Bridgeport, Connecticut, and kind of having more of like a homogenous community where people looked like me. I wanted to explore the issues that were happening in my city on a greater international kind of space and floor. And so I think the Fulbright addresses just that. I love the personal autonomy that came with the program, being able to draft your own project, being able to highlight what's really important to you without encroachment from other people or encroachment from other researchers. And I feel like the Fulbright did just that for me. So it was kind of an amalgamation of me wanting to live abroad, get the international experience, having a different background and not really, sure how to connect all my interests together. That led me to the Fulbright program. And yeah, I'm really happy to speak further about my research a bit later.
That's fantastic. And it sounds really wonderful, the aspect that it sounds like you're learning from going abroad, learning experiences from what people are doing in other places, and then how that applies. So this aspect of applied research as well. Alexander, how about you? Where did you decide to apply and why Fulbright?
Sure, thank you, Elena. So my name is Alexander. I applied through the University of California, my undergrad institution, and I applied to University of Toronto, way on the other side, and in Canada. So for me, that was very interesting coming from a California perspective to be able to see not only the international involvement that's like embedded in the city, but also the different climate, the different ways people go about their lives, just in that general scenario. And I worked directly with the hospital for sick children. We did, I worked in a lab that did surgical robotics for pediatric patients. And one of the projects that I worked on was specifically about how to get robotics in an MRI. And I can talk more about that later, but it was really exciting, and I was really glad to be a part of it.
Oh my gosh, yes, that's so wonderful. So it sounds like, we have law and the environment, we have, technology and health. And Adriana, what if you can share with us when you decided to apply for a Fulbright and why Fulbright?
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Adriana. I did my Fulbright in 2018-2019 in Beijing, China. It unfortunately ended a little bit early because of the coronavirus pandemic, which was an epidemic at the time. But I still had a great time with it, great experience. Okay, and then when did I decide? So I've always wanted to apply for an international exchange program to expand my experience in both art history and religious studies, because I do have an interdisciplinary study with East Asian studies with that specialization, where I specialize in Chinese art history. And, you know, getting started, how I got started with this in the first place was during the summer of 2017, I participated in my own school's research project. They held this big research project on the Silk Road, and I was selected to go to China and pursue a research project in Chinese art history. So, I mean, and we traveled across from Beijing, and then even all the way to the Xinjiang province. So that was interesting. And that was like prior to Fulbright. So I just wanted to take it to the next level from there. So that's why I decided to apply for Fulbright. And, you know, it was awesome. And as far as the application, when did I decide? That was like my sophomore year. A lady at my store actually told me about the Fulbright when I told her about my trip in 2017. And I had no idea what Fulbright was. So she told me to just ask my school about it. And I did. That was during my sophomore year, and then find out that there is an actual counselor that helps you with the Fulbright application. So sophomore year is when I got started.
Wow, that's incredible. And it's also amazing because it really shows the span of research. And I think that's something that's important for everybody to keep in mind, is that it doesn't necessarily need to just be science or health. It can be mechanical engineering, and it can be law and environment. It can be art and culture. And so there's so many different aspects of research that apply to this research grant. Now, for me, and I realize I didn't introduce myself. I'm Elena Perez, and I did a Fulbright also, a research study Fulbright. And the next question that I have, because we have all learned about these opportunities in different ways, is whether you had any assistance with the Fulbright application, and if so, who helped you? Maybe Alexander, if we could start with you.
Sure, thank you. So I did mine in the year 2017 to 2018. And that whole process for me started at my school the year prior. I was looking for money, as a low-income undergrad student usually does, ways to get scholarships. And they held, my campus had a scholarships office program. And basically an office that deals with different programs that are from various realms, including the Rhodes, the Fulbright, a few others to name, just to name a few. But I really had like a range of them that I was applying to, and they had to calm me down and tell me, please pick one or two. And so they walked me through the process. It was like a 6-month process over the summer, a lot of feedback, a lot of changes to my document, and that was really, really helpful, and it helped me to refine my writing process. And then afterwards, my research advisors did a mock interview along with one of the diversity and inclusion representatives from the campus in college engineering, and just sat me down and to talk about the different parts of the personal part and how that pertained to the actual international study.
That sounds fantastic. So it sounds like the campus really offered a tremendous amount of support. Adriana, did you have the same experience?
Yeah, it was about the same. So the counselor that was at our school, he helped. Well, he helps you, but it's more like the application process is more independent, but he still gives you guidance as far as the application itself, how to apply. But as far as the content within my application, as far as my grant statement, my professors helped me out a lot with that.
That's good. Yeah, that's fantastic. So having the direct help from the professors is another route. Chayla, how about for you?
Yeah, I worked similar to Alexander. I worked pretty closely with the department at Villanova, where I attended for undergrad. And I think they were really integral in kind of having me hone in on one country. I was like, I want to go to all these different countries. This project would make sense in XXX country. Like, please tell me what I should do. And they were extremely helpful. They worked with me throughout the entire process, even in between becoming a semifinalist to a finalist. They're talking about other career opportunities, still applying for jobs. So I think it really is university specific, but there are avenues for students to access other like Fulbright alums or advisors who can aid you in the process. I was just fortunate to have a really kind of robust and intimate experience with my department at Villanova.
Yeah, that's good. And then a great point to reach out to other resources that might be available outside of the direct program or your direct professors. Now, recognizing that, you had been planning for this, you guys are thinking about this, and knowing that there are people who are listening who are also thinking about how they can do their application. One question is, how much time did you actually spend on the application? And so, Adriana, I'm going to start with you. But if you could all think, well, how much time did you end up spending on the application, so people can start to think and prepare?
About 2 years, I want to say, because because sophomore year was when I first discovered it, and then that's when I first reached out to our school counselor. So I really wanted to, and this was directly after the research project that I was working on through the Silk Road, through my school's Silk Road project that they sent me on. And I wanted to kind of hone in on an area of research that I could select for Fulbright. So yeah, that took me a while to kind of narrow it down because I had so many interests within the Silk Road that I wanted to focus on, but I wanted to hone it down to one.
That makes sense. And going for the long game too. I think it's good for everyone to know it's good to like hone in. There are a lot of ideas, so sometimes that can take time. Chayla, how about you?
Yeah, a rough time. I think I started thinking about the application like March of my junior year at Villanova. Then I worked on it a lot in the summer, kind of like cultivating what type of project I wanted to do. And I think it just depends on how early you're informed of the Fulbright program. So everyone being here today is a great kind of segue into that. But we had like information sessions. So I went to a few of those and I thought I went back and forth. So I think it just depends on when you find out about it and how much time you can commit to it, amongst other things that are happening in your life. But I think I spent roughly like 6 or 7 months on it. But I had a lot of like edits and revisions. I mean, weekly devoted time to just the application to ensure that it was really concise and on point. So yeah, roughly around like 7 months, I would say.
That's pretty good. And Alexander, how about you?
Sure. And before, sorry to go off topic, I wanted to make sure to double back around to the last question. And the reason why is because all of us seem to have had institutional support. So we did not come in as basically a freelance applicant. We came in connected through the university. And for those of us here present who are not currently in a university, there are options to apply as I don't remember the exact term for it, but the freelance. And so you don't need to absolutely need to be tied to a university.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And if I can just go, I mean, I wanted this to be about you guys, but I'm just going to chime in here real quick. I actually applied at large. So I wasn't associated with the university. I had been some years out of the university, and I didn't have that support at all. And so it's interesting. I did reach out to a couple friends, and I asked them to read it, and it was very helpful because they said, don't use so much jargon. We don't know what you're talking about. So that is very helpful. So sometimes if you don't have the resources on campus, it's good to reach out to people who you trust and people who will help you through this process that might not be on campus, or again, seeing what other tools that might be available, whether they're online or there are a number of affinity groups, diversity groups with Fulbright, so utilizing those. So thank you so much, Alexander. It's a good, very important point.
Thank you. And to answer the question, my school, the SOP office, Scholarship Opportunities Program office, I think is the actual name, held I think I may have mentioned this before, but they had a little info session But that info session was to let us know about a pre-application that they do. And so it's basically like the trimming down process that happened almost a year prior to any of that, maybe a year and a few months. And so it was actually a long road. And looking back at it, I actually just happened to luckily fall into that time span where they could help me. Because had I been another semester later or another quarter later, they would have just said, oh, well, you should have been there. You should have known about it. And that's unfortunate. But the key point is that it's good that you all know that there are many options out there. And yeah, so they helped me over the summer after that pre-application. It took a little while. And then I think I mentioned before that my PIs were also influential.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. And now just to bring in the other end of the spectrum, I'll just note that I started mine maybe 3 or 4 months beforehand. So that's a little bit sooner. I thought I was well on top of it, but I guess that's just the next time. So I think that's just also important to know is that there are, you can start thinking about it way ahead in advance, and you can also look to it a little bit beforehand. One thing to note, I think it's valuable, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the support on campus, sometimes they expect you to have the application in and complete maybe a month or two before the actual due date. And that's so that they can help look over the application, make sure everything's all set. So not to deter you, but to encourage you. And I would like to ask each of you if you have advice that you would give to somebody who's getting started on that application. So what would you do to encourage them? Chayla or Say?
I think 2 pieces of advice. My first piece of advice is to show yourself some grace. It's, a bit of a daunting application, and a lot goes into it, in the formulation of it. So take it step by step, but just know that this is all a process that everyone goes through. Show yourself some grace in that regard. And then really spend time thinking intentionally and deeply about the country you're thinking about, and understand not just that your project would work well there, but the culture, how you might, fit in, certain things that are happening in the political climate. Those are all things to really consider. And I think once you really narrow down your countries, then it's just like, it's free game there. You can talk so much about why this country is important to you, but spend that time really thinking about where you'd want to live for 9 to 12 months and where you can actually grow as a person. Because for me, that was really the differentiating factor between, going to a country in Europe and going to a country in Southern Africa. So if you take that time to not just say, this is it's a pretty place and no one really applies here, so my chances are greater, or, I can vacation here, it's closer to this country in Europe, but really think about where you want to live and where you want to grow, because that identity is now attached to you. I'm wearing Namibian earrings, it's an identity that's attached to you, so think a lot about the country you're applying to.
Oh, that's such wonderful advice and such a great point, right? We really do end up taking away a bit of that identity. Adriana, how about you? What advice would you give?
Well, going off of what you said earlier, Elena, the best advice that I would give is to reach out to your university and see if they have designated advisors, or even better yet, reach out to many of Fulbright's diversity initiative groups. I'm the diversity coordinator for Fulbright Prism, that is our LGBTQ group. But we also have Fulbright Noir, Fulbright Salem, Fulbright Latinx, Fulbright Lotus, and many, many more. So just reach out to them through by emailing them, or even through Instagram, and they'll direct you to the right person. Or reach out to me. I mean, if you if you would like.
Yes, that's excellent. And that's a very great point is look to those resources. There's alumni ambassadors also, and a lot of people that some of the Fulbright affinity groups that you were mentioning, some of them have mentorship opportunities, and some are, everyone's trying to work to help people out. So definitely reach out. And Alexander, what advice would you give?
Definitely reach out. But if you have the opportunity and get access to someone who maybe has done this before, or someone who knows your work, or someone who's applied to different broad spectrum fellowships, is to definitely bring them in, but also get as many eyes on it as possible from different majors, because the people who are reviewing your application are not necessarily going to be in your major. In fact, it's for my case, that's very unlikely because, you know, engineering. And the other thing is, yeah, definitely. I went through that process that Chayla was talking about. Oh, which ones got, because they show you how many applicants they get versus how many awardees they give out. So for me, that was like my first draft of what countries I was going to go to. But I think it's really important to have some intended connection, some connection to where you're going.
Yeah, that's actually so many good points. So back to thinking about where do I want to go and what connections would that make? And also looking to those who have experience doing this and who can guide you and the many different perspectives, because in the end, you're going to be writing for commissioners and people who are reviewing your application who might not be experts in the field that you're working in. So you need to be able to convey those ideas to the everyday person. That's fantastic. And it makes me wonder though, and I'm going to start with you, Alexander, because it sounds like, you know, you were working with people who were very familiar with the application process. Were you applying to any other opportunities other than Fulbright?
Definitely. During that time, I was applying to the NSF GRFP, which is a graduate research fellowship program through the NSF National Science Foundation. I was applying to the GEM, which is a industry-led, or not industry-led, it's an industry-backed fellowship where you can get not only an internship with maybe a government facility or a sponsor, but also you'll get some funds towards your graduate program, which is often a useful leveraging point if you're trying to go into grad school. And then I was applying to a bunch of stuff. Yeah,
Definitely.
Putting your eggs in more than just one basket. Chayla, how about you?
Yeah, so I didn't apply to any other international exchange programs, but I was focusing a lot on whether or not I was going straight through the law school. So I was thinking about studying for the LSAT and preparing for like graduate education opportunities. I did apply to some more environmentally focused research positions, maybe under the NSF or with different departmental agencies, but not so much anything kind of in line with the Fulbright program, just thinking about if school was the next kind of option for me.
Okay, so figuring out what to do next, and Adriana.
So yes, I applied to the Yenching Academy in Peking. That was through Peking University in Beijing, and you know it was similar to what my goal was for Fulbright, was to work hands-on, one-on-one with a specialist in my desired field in art history. But funny enough, literally like a week before that application was due, I found out I got the Fulbright. So I kind of abandoned the application. Sorry, Peking.
It kind of relieves the stress a little bit though, right? I mean, you're just like, whew, at least I have something coming through. And that's so fantastic. You ended up right where you wanted to be. So congratulations, that's a big feat. It also makes me wonder though, you know, you are all applying, and as everybody who's listening in wants to know, well, you know, we have to apply and we have to have an affiliation. And I know when I first read about an affiliation, I thought, uh-oh, what? You know, and so how did you navigate that? How did you find out who is going to be your affiliated institution, and how, you know, how did you figure that out? Adriana, can we start with you?
So it was actually really funny how it happened. My sponsor professor actually became Dr. Ning Chang, who is a specialist in Dunhuang art, which is in my area of study. And the way I met him was he visited my university freshman year. This was way before I was even thinking about Fulbright. I was invited to actually go to a dinner before he was speaking before our school. My class invited the top 5 students in the class grade-wise, and then when I was invited, I actually struck up a conversation with him. So, you know, that was really nice. We talked about art. I talked about his research and how fascinating it was, and etc. So skipping ahead to sophomore year, when I was considering the Fulbright, my professor actually reached out to Dr. Ning Chang again, and asked if, you know, because I guess because my professor was saying, because she's such a good student, you know, would you like to be her sponsor for Fulbright? And then it took a while because Dr. Chiang had to figure out how many students he was taking in for his graduate level, because I would be a visiting student adding on to that. So literally a few weeks before the application was due, he got back with me, because I was waiting on a few other possible affiliates, whether it was from my work at the Cleveland Museum, because I also worked at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and I had mentors there that knew people, and then I had another professor that knew somebody, so I was kind of waiting to hear back from one of them. And then I ultimately ended up with Dr. Ning Chong. He got back and was like, yeah, I'll take you. So, and that's where I ended up. His university is Capital Normal University in Beijing. It's literally in the middle of the city. So it's a really nice small school. It's also affiliated with Peking University. So, I would go back and forth there if I needed something. So it was really awesome.
That's amazing. Well, and very impressive too that you were the top 5 and you were able to wine and dine with somebody who would eventually take you. And I don't know if everyone has that experience, but we will definitely applaud you for that. That's amazing. But also, I think what's really important to note is that it sounded like you were putting yourself out there and you're reaching out to a number of people. So reaching out to all of your contacts to see what happens. And I think that's kind of the scary part, right? Is you have to kind of reach out. Maybe Chayla, if we can go to you next. How did you navigate this process?
Yeah, so I'm like a serial over planner, and I was just nervous that someone might back out and someone might not get back to me. I'm trying to communicate with someone in another continent. So I casted the widest net when it came to affiliation letters. I obviously had like a central institution that I was targeting, which was the University of Namibia, and one of the lecturers and department heads there. But after like many conversations at like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, my time, speaking to them about my research, they were able to act as like somewhat of a liaison to the other affiliates that I was able to obtain. So I actually submitted 3 affiliation letters for Fulbright. I think the minimum is 1, the maximum might be 3. And I just want to max that out to really show that there was support for my project. And because my project was focusing on the environment, policy, and the law, I wanted kind of a holistic representation of people who could speak to my research. And so I reached out to like a local legal assistance center that literally fielded legal claims day to day, open door policy. I had an affiliation with the World Wildlife Fund of Namibia, which is like a global organization who could speak more to how I can enter the gaming reserve areas and dealing with tourism and environmental policy there. And then obviously the university that I mentioned a bit earlier. So I definitely casted a wide net. I recommend that just to be safe in terms of, when the due date might come up. There's always technology issues, and some people want something mailed to them. And there are a lot of different moving parts that might play a role. So I think just having as many affiliates as you can is useful, and trying to find ways to show support for the different nuances between your project, not just from a university, but maybe a smaller organization who could speak more to something more nuanced and more niche in your research.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic. And you know what I think is really interesting here is I know for myself, and it sounds like Adriana as well, we only had one affiliation, one institute that we affiliated with our work. And you had 3. And so it sounds like you were much more thorough, but it's also a really important point to raise that a lot of times they don't need to necessarily just be research institutions, but you were affiliated with an environmental institution or with a legal firm or legal institution. So these things are important to keep in mind too, that they can be quite diverse. So Alexander, please share with us how you navigated this process.
Sure. Definitely want to echo what Chayla was saying, cast that wide net. I casted not only a wide net, but a really weird net. And I say that because my undergrad was really like broad. I did a triple major, mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering, and material science. And the process of figuring out which one of those I was going to accentuate with this Fulbright kind of came through a lot of different avenues. For one of them, I don't know if I mentioned I was applying to grad school during the same time. So I was reaching out to also the people who I was intending to potentially work with and saying, do you think I'm going to apply, for the Fulbright as a backup in case I don't get into your school? Who would you recommend? I'm looking at these countries, and occasionally they would give me a few answers. From there, I'd kind of like leverage the network, just like Adriana was mentioning, and to figure out, kind of pare it down. I basically figured out which one of them was. It was basically like a race to the deadline, and figuring out which one of them was most confident that they could take me, and had the strongest affiliation letter. And then on top of that, because I was affiliated with both the University of Toronto and the Hospital for Sick Children, I had to get 2 affiliation letters, one from each institution, and one from under each institution, a representative from each. Mine was actually really weird even after that, because the person who was going to take me on, the main person who was going to take me on, ended up being his company, his startup, or maybe not startup, it had been around for a while, but his company had been acquired, and so he retired. And so I got passed on to someone else within the institution, which didn't seem like a big issue to Fulbright after I was selected. So that's kind of my route.
No, I think that's actually really good. And I do like that idea of casting your net wide. Very strategic to reach out to the universities you were applying to ask them if they knew other people that might be interested. That's very smart. I had a very similar experience where at the last minute, the institution, after I received the Fulbright, the institution could no longer work with me. And so it was just reaching out to as many people as possible. But again, it works out somehow. So I think that's a really great idea about casting your net wide. Applause for majoring in three intense majors. So fantastic, Alexander. And also the last point that you had made was just having a really, not the last point, but one of the points that really stood out to me was having a very strong letter of affiliation. So if you choose that, cast your net wide and make sure that you are choosing a really strong letter of affiliation, one that you can probably count on, hopefully. So, you guys are starting out your applications, and from start to finish, what I want to ask, and this, obviously things are going to change, right? You're going to choose your affiliation, or your affiliation is going to choose you, and this might change the focus of your application. And so from the start of your application to the final draft, what were some of the major changes that you made? And Alexander, I'm going to start with you because you're laughing.
Yeah, I laugh because I wrote 3 different applications and project proposals because of my 3 majors, and so for me, it made sense to try and find one for each, and basically pursue through a graduate program, whichever I ended up in. So that was also my graduate program. That's why I say I casted a weird net. So over the process, the SOT office basically were like, okay, this is enough, pick one. And I had like a month or 2 to pick one, and it really just came down to, like I said before, who was writing the strongest affiliation letter, who was working with me and responding to me. And then, yeah, it was between Spain and Canada at that point. And then Spain, I don't know if anyone knows this, but in Europe, oh no, not Spain, Sweden, sorry. In those areas, it's very cold a lot of the time. So when summer comes along, they take that break serious. And they do not respond to anything. And so that was the decider for me.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So I switched from like materials analysis of like clear celluloid, basically like the idea of using clear wood for like a lot of different applications, to robotic surgery for pediatrics. Yeah, that was the switch.
Yeah, it's quite the switch too. And so I believe that's why you're laughing. And it makes sense, you have 3 different majors, you have 3 different focuses, and you have these different regions as well. And so it's going to be a combination of where you're going to focus, who's going to be the affiliation. It sounds like that adaptability is really important. So that ability to be able to just roll with it. Adriana, if you want to share, any major changes from the start of your application to the finish.
Oh my goodness, I had 20 drafts of for the grant purpose because because my research is so interdisciplinary. While I am looking at Dunhuang art, I specifically was looking at Tongut art. And Tonguts are a extinct ethno group that did reside in the region where the Dunhuang caves are in northwestern China. So I wanted to make it clear in my proposal that, I am still researching Chinese art. I am, and to understand this extinct ethno group, you have to look at the history, the religion, etc. So I had to figure out how to put that in words without them thinking that I'm all over the place. So, I mean, yeah, I had to make so many changes as far as wording, as far as narrowing down what I wanted to say as far as that goes, because they had to understand. And because not many people know what Tonguts are, so I had to include a description about that. So those were the major changes that I had to make.
Yeah, it's a really fine point because it's just trying to convey all of these many ideas and all of your excitement in 2 pages, or maybe 3. But so yeah, I think that's a really good point, is how do you funnel that all down and also explain the things that need, you have to decide what needs to be explained and what you need to let go of as much as you love it. And Chayla, for you.
Yeah, I echo what my fellow panelists have mentioned. I think for me, it was just a matter of like editing down was probably the biggest issue that I came into. I just had too much to say, but also making sure that the amount of explanation I provided was in line with how many like months I was committing to X thing. So if I was committing to whatever thing for 5 months, I would speak more about why I'm spending so much time there than somewhere else. I think the bulk of change came like when I got in country. A lot changed for me when my Fulbright grant actually started. Like similar to Alexander, in December, Namibians like all leave the city and go to like their village and go to the coast. So like it was a ghost town. Like I think you would see like one car driving on the street when I first arrived. So I couldn't really start my research until I got there. And then there was a strike at the university for wages. And they were like, sorry, even though we love you, we can't host you right now. We're striking for wages. So a lot changed in country, and that took a lot of like, let's revise, let's figure out how we can make this work. So not so much before. I think it was just the natural like editing of a paper and trying to convey information, like you said, Elena, in 2 pages. But definitely in country, a lot changed.
That's actually super helpful, and it makes me wonder, so now as we think more about your grant experience, it's really helpful that we've talked about the application process. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to be interested in that, but the grant experience itself, part of the application process is why you need to go abroad to conduct your research. So I would like it if you could convey like why how you explained why going abroad in your application was needed for your research. And then if you can tell me, transitioning into that experience, why was it? How did it benefit your experience? Or I'm sorry, your research. So Chayla, maybe we'll start with you because you're definitely starting to talk about the different experiences that you've had.
Yeah, of course. So I think, and one thing, again, going back to my interest in the environment and in law and social policy and things of that nature. So Namibia is one of the first countries that incorporated environmental protection in their constitution. And Namibian activists can't really access environmental decision-making happening in country. And so Namibia had a really specific stance on environmental protection and natural resources. And I felt like sometimes, the country we currently live in is a bit opposite of that. And I want to kind of see the connection between what's happening in America versus a smaller country like Namibia, and what are the changes within their, framework of how people govern themselves. So I really harped on the fact that my findings in this country have such strong implications for researchers like myself that now live in the States, and also finding ways to connect these similar topics that are global. Environmental issues are global. So I really honed kind of in on that in my research. In terms of what I took away from my Fulbright experience, I often joke that I personally gained so much personally rather than just my research. Like I just learning I was 21 years old when I went to Namibia. So I was young and I was trying to navigate life in a new place. So I think just learning again how to communicate, how to not have to be the voice for every Black Westerner that comes to Namibia, and being able to have difficult conversations, and using, again, this like ambassador role that Fulbright just gives to you in a way that's not so much, I'm from America, let me tell you why my research is important, but let's like learn together, and let me also address some of the issues or topics or ideas that you might have. So I grew so much personally through my Fulbright experience. But in terms of the research side of things, I mean, you can't really be waking up at 3 a.m. and going on a game drive and counting the amount of oryx and kudu animals that you see, and then thinking about how a new development by external countries would impact this game reserve. I mean, these things are very specific to the country that I went to. So I just really harped on the experience, how the experience would be so unique, and I wouldn't be able to find that just, you know, driving down to Florida or driving somewhere else here in the States.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And then a huge important piece for the application is how this aspect, this country, how will it be unique from just staying at home and doing the same research, right? That's an excellent point. And I also think it's important, part of the application piece is, well, how will this help you grow as a person? And knowing that you will be spending so much time here, it definitely is going to influence you and have you grow, and you will be an ambassador of sorts. So Adriana, if I can jump to you, and if you can just share, why you needed to go to abroad to conduct your research, and how did going abroad benefit your research?
Oh yeah, of course. So going along with my reasoning earlier, I had much more access to my Tonga research in China. I mean, yeah, there were resources here, and there are a few Tonga scholars. I dropped my ring. It's fine. There were a few Tonga scholars here, but there's more access there because it is more mysterious, and that is the country of origin. So going to China, which contains locations of where they once resided, as well as the research facilities, whether it's universities, libraries, etc., as well as the artifacts themselves, it was beneficial to grasp a better understanding of my research topic. And it benefited me, I guess, just the experience overall, like Chayla was saying, whether it's through personal experiences and the research experiences. I think overall my language proficiency is a lot better. So there's that. I mean, because the reading and writing is something that you have to be really, really honed in on when researching the Tongans. And I also started learning a bit of classical Chinese, which is, that's like the original Chinese before the simplified and traditional.
Oh, that's incredible. It's remarkable. And it's a good point. Yes, as you both have mentioned so far, and I'm sure Alexander will say too, is just not only what you bring to the country, but what the country offers you. And I think that's an important piece for people to note for the application, but also for life, right? As you choose your country. And Alexander, so why did you need to go abroad to conduct your research? And how did going abroad benefit you?
Awesome, thank you. The experience to go abroad was driven largely, at least on the research side, by the fact that the health system in Canada allows for a lot of funded projects, especially around pediatric surgery, especially around teleoperation. And one of the concepts that I was thinking about during the time was, how do we do as non-invasively as possible surgery under MRI, not using line of sight operation. And right, at least at the time, and they definitely still are very strong in that field, they were one of the strongest in the field. And it just made sense to go to Canada. On the culturally relevant side, Canada, as many of us may or may not know, that's where they grow the hockey players. No, I'm just no, that's sorry, I had to. Being a person of Latinx and Native American descent, it made a lot of sense for me to go to a space where some of that is either hidden, some of that is either retracted from the cities, but somewhat prevalent in the outer countries. And so being able to see that dichotomy and being able to just engage in some of that was really important for me, especially being that a lot of the Latinx communities there are international. So understanding how that dynamic is different from what I experienced here in LA, what I experienced here in different parts of California is really important. What was really personally relevant for me. It brought me closer to a lot of some of the things that I didn't know that I was tied to.
Yeah, that's actually really helpful and a good point, thinking back about how it benefits the research, just recognizing the strengths of the institutions you're going to, and hopefully they will bring out your own strengths too. So you talk about the strength of that institution and how it aligns with your strengths, but then also what you learn about your own country, about yourself, your ties to your own country or your ties to other countries, and how that differs from other people and other people's experiences abroad. And I think that's actually really helpful. There's so many other things that I'm sure we'd like to cover, and I'm glad that you guys were able to share snippets of your experience with everybody. But since we only have 4 minutes or so left, maybe less, it would be really wonderful we could just go around. And if you can share just, some major messages that you would like to offer to those listening, just any major takeaways from either your experience abroad or from coming back, anything that you think would be really valuable. And Alexander, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Lena. The main thing I would say, coming from, again, a person who grew up in Southern California, LA area, hopping around because we're low income, understanding that, even in college when I was getting that little bit of money, when I was going to those scholarship seminars to hear about all the scholarships, that money wasn't necessarily going to go in my pocket for bare money. That was, I'm going to split this up, have some's for rent, some's for food, and some's for family. And I think it's important to recognize and to think about and to understand that in some of these programs, specifically the one I'll speak about my experience explicitly. In my experience in my program, going to Canada was on my dollar. I didn't get paid until I was two months into it. So the idea of getting a loan and then being able to pay it at the end of the month was a non-option for me. The idea of getting an advancement from Fulbright was a non-option for them. And so it became a situation where not only was I worrying about where I was going to get food from, where I was going to live, but the reality of moving to a whole new country is you don't have those support systems that you may have had. If I was here in LA, I could take 5 buses to get to Riverside and hang out with my family until I have money, and then I take those buses back and I go back to work. And I can't do that here. I couldn't do that there. So it became, okay, well, maybe I'll eat today, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll sleep in my lab until I get money to get a new place. And it was really a hard situation because a lot of people don't want to sell or rent to you until you're actually physically in a place. So I was doing Airbnbs for the first 3 weeks. I had to sink all my money into that. And again, coming from a family where no one can really help you, it becomes an issue. And so to some of our students who are out there from low income families, low income backgrounds, I want to make it apparent to you that try and look for, I have heard that some Fulbright countries, some Fulbright programs will let you do an advancement. Reach out for that, find out about that ahead of time. I didn't know that was going to be an issue.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So the realities of the program, and maybe what people often miss because they make these assumptions that people come from backgrounds that they can afford it. And so that's a really important message for the Fulbright program itself, and also for those who are applying, just to be aware of what's coming your way so that you can plan for how you're going to tackle that. And especially if maybe it's just reaching out to Fulbright, say, hey, these are some of the issues that I'm going to contend with. What are potential avenues of support? That's really very important. Adriana, if you'd like to share any, words for, any advice you have for those who are looking into research and studying grants.
Yeah, of course. So I do want to say I recognize that many people aren't going to have the same, I guess, luck as I did, going back from freshman year, meeting the professor at the dinner. And then after that, my trip in 2017 leading up, and that eventually led to my work experience at the Cleveland Museum of Art, which eventually led to, all of that combined led to Fulbright. I also grew up with not many resources. And for some thinking I may have had parents who had powerful connections. I didn't have that either. But it was really through my own, all of it was through my own networking and through my own hard work. So I guess a takeaway that I can provide is don't be afraid to get yourself out there and network. And whether, and I would start with your professors, honestly, if you would like to get involved with international exchange.
Okay, that's perfect. And Chayla, if you could share just any part of, last words of encouragement or advice.
Yeah. I'll be quick. I think just be open and adaptable to things that might change in your country. A lot changed for me when I got there, but also stand behind your research. Don't let people kind of strong arm you away from doing what you intended to do and what your application said you would do. So just be adaptable, but still be confident. Don't let people push you around, and just be intentional. That's what I would say.
That's wonderful. And I really thank you to all of the panelists. I just want you to know that for all of the attendees, if you can complete the survey immediately following so that you can be entered to win various prizes. And just a huge thank you, because I think we all learn from each other and everybody. I mean, we all can improve and get better. The program, applicants, candidates, and those who are studying abroad and coming out of this. So huge thank you to all of our panelists, and huge thank you to We Represent for hosting us.